What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by your favorite beat reporter, Chris Fedor. It's Taco Tuesday, Chris. How you feeling?
I'm doing great, man. We actually had Chipotle for dinner earlier tonight on Taco Tuesday. Why not?
Hey, man, that is the way to go. I'm actually probably Chipotle's biggest hater, but I'm gonna let it slide. I'm gonna let it slide for
I
the
know
day.
you've expressed your displeasure with Chipotle, and I can understand. There are other people that don't like it either. Some of the portions can be a little bit iffy. The quality varies, it feels like, from location to location, or Monday to Tuesday, Tuesday to Friday. You know what I mean? So there just isn't that level of consistency, and I totally understand it. But it was Taco Tuesday. We didn't want to cook. Holly was already out doing some kind of errands. So we decided to go with Chipotle, and Elliot loved it. I loved it. Holly loved it. It was great.
So I went the authentic route. I went to Tapatia's Taqueria for lunch today. Me and my girlfriend went out there. Yeah, had some good authentic food for Mexican food. It was delicious. I was excited to get it. And actually, this gets into the first topic, which is kind of in the funner realm of what we're talking about today. And it's Taco Tuesday, so I guess you got to mention LeBron James, who kind of made the term more famous than it had been before. And there's two things to talk about with LeBron James. And we'll start with the more fun side when it comes to that, and we'll get to business a little bit later. So LeBron had an interview, or actually was on his own podcast, Mind the Game podcast, talking to JJ Redick, who is the co-host of that. We'll get into JJ a little bit later. But LeBron said and was talking about Kyrie Irving being in the finals of Dallas Mavericks versus the Boston Celtics. We had a whole podcast about Kyrie Irving and talked about that a lot in the latter half of a podcast recently. And I want to talk about what LeBron said. He said that he had called Kyrie the wizard. He said that he missed playing with Kyrie and that he was upset that he is no longer Kyrie's running mate. And Chris, I just want to get your sense of what it was like to cover and watch those guys together, and then also comparing that to watching Luka and Kyrie from afar.
Man, LeBron and Kyrie together, it was magic. It really was. They played so well off of each other, Ethan. It was a really, really good pairing. And you could tell that during the time that they were playing together, especially early on, that they understood how each one was going to make the other one better and how each one could make things easier on the other. And look, for all of the things that happened toward the end of the relationship between LeBron and Kyrie, and all the things that happened toward the end of Kyrie's tenure with the Cavs that led to him being traded to Boston, LeBron always spoke extremely highly of Kyrie, even before LeBron came back to Cleveland. Like, he was talking about Kyrie at the All-Star game and just how enthralled with Kyrie he was, and how incredible of a talent Kyrie was, and seeing him play at such a young age and do the things that he was able to do and the success that he was able to have individually at such a young age, that always captured LeBron's attention. And a big reason why LeBron came back in 2014 was because Kyrie was here, and because he wanted to play alongside Kyrie, and he wanted to mentor Kyrie, and he wanted to give, as LeBron liked to say, he wanted to give Kyrie the blueprint for greatness. The only problem is Kyrie already had a basketball mentor, and it wasn't LeBron. That wasn't the guy that Kyrie looked up to. The guy Kyrie looked up to was Kobe. So LeBron was trying to be that to Kyrie, and obviously they played together. So LeBron was giving him pointers on the sidelines and during stoppages and all that kind of stuff. But Kyrie looked up to Kobe, not to LeBron. It was very, very different from that dynamic. But in saying that, they understood how they could make each other better. And LeBron felt like at that stage of his career, he needed a running mate like Kyrie. And I think Kyrie grew to understand that if he was going to become a champion, if he was going to learn some positive championship habits, if he was going to become a winning basketball player, something that he wasn't early on in his time with the Cavs. Now, part of that was the Cavs were purposely tanking, but he wasn't a winner until LeBron came back, and I think Kyrie grew to understand that to become a winning basketball player, he had to learn how to be that, and he did learn how to be that alongside LeBron. So the pairing was great. There are a lot of conversations about LeBron and D Wade together, LeBron and AD together. I don't know, man. Like at the time that Kyrie and LeBron were together, I think there is a strong argument that is the best running mate that LeBron had. And it's because D Wade was toward like the end of his career. He was just past his prime when LeBron latched on to him. Obviously, he was established as a champion. He was established as a Hall of Famer. But Kyrie, prime Kyrie, at the apex of his talent, basically alongside LeBron, like that was as good of a duo as you're going to find in the NBA. And now you're seeing Kyrie make that kind of connection with Luka. And if those two guys stay together, there's no reason to think that Dallas isn't going to be in a similar position to this one, competing for championships. Obviously, nothing is guaranteed in the NBA and things happen. But if those two guys stay together, there are plenty of reasons to believe that this isn't just a one-off thing for Dallas here.
Yeah, Chris, and I think you made a really good point, and something that Kyrie has actually touched on recently about how much of a mentor Kobe was for him at a young age. We've talked about him challenging him one-on-one, and Kobe saying that he's going to put $50,000 to any charity if he were to win that game. Don't know if that game ever happened, but I mean, that just knowing that was him after his Rookie of the Year campaign and knowing that he was willing to put himself out there against one of the all-time greats in Kobe Bryant. And Kyrie talked about it recently, talking about how much he misses Kobe every day, how much like the mentorship that he misses as well, and how he carries that every day and every play and things like that. And I mean, you also think about how he's instilled that mentorship in the players around him. Like the Mavericks are a young group. Basic, like they have Derek Lively. You think about Luka Doncic, one of the up and coming running stars, and how much he needs mentorship because he's never been to the NBA Finals. But you also got to realize like how much Kyrie had to grow to get to this point. And some people say that he needed that tenure with LeBron James to do that. And some people say he needed that tenure in Brooklyn to deal with that because you got to see him go through adversity. He lost his grandfather. He lost Kobe Bryant in that stint. And you got to see him have to reevaluate who he was as a person. And I wrote about that for cleveland.com today and talked about how much the Cavs fandom should want to cheer on or root for Kyrie Irving because of what he's gone through as a player and also what he meant to the city of Cleveland. And he's not done nothing but show love to Cleveland since he's left. So I think the next part. Well,
not initially.
Later on.
Initially on his way out.
Yeah, definitely later on. Later on.
Yeah.
And more recently,
is what you're going. Because initially there was bad blood. And he said, Boston was a real sports town, unlike Cleveland. So, yeah, there were some things that he said that obviously he regrets to this point. But you're right. Recently, he has talked about growing up as a kid, like as a member of the Cavs, some of the great times that he had as a member of the Cavs, a lot of the things that he learned as a member of the Cavs. And thinking back fondly on those years with the Cavs. Those were formative years for Kyrie. Not just Kyrie the basketball player, but Kyrie the person as well.
Yeah, and I mean that's really where my article went today, was more the human aspect of it rather than the person. But the human aspect of it is because he wanted to get and went and got the attention and the counseling that he needed, you now continue to get to see one of the best ball handlers and one of the best finishers in the game. But the next part of that goes back to LeBron James, who the Cavs know and love very well. And he has a podcast with JJ Redick, who we alluded to earlier on in the podcast. And try saying that 3 times fast. And JJ is apparently, reports are saying that JJ Redick is now the front runner for the head coaching job with the Lakers, which one goes into the coaching search for the Cavs. I know we had never talked about JJ really being a true option for the Cavs, but it was up in the air. But now knowing that he is the front runner for the Lakers job, you never know what could have gone on behind the scenes, but it's very ironic that he's got a podcast with LeBron James and how that dynamic could pan out. What do you think about that whole thing?
Well, so from the very beginning of the Cavs coaching search, I mentioned, without actually saying the person, because I didn't think that it was necessary to say the person, I mentioned that there was at least one candidate that if he had his choice, he was going to pick the Lakers over the Cavs, and it was JJ. JJ would not theoretically turn down an opportunity to coach the Los Angeles Lakers, that historic franchise with LeBron James, for an opportunity to coach the Cavs. It just wasn't going to happen. So I always felt like he wasn't as realistic of a target for the Cavs as some of these other guys. But there's a layer to this, Ethan, that affects the Cavs here. If you think back to the last couple of coaching searches that the Cavs have had, they went with David Blatt instead of Ty Lue, but they opened up the checkbook to make sure that Ty Lue was going to be on the staff of David Blatt as basically the lead assistant coach. He wasn't paid like a head coach, but he was paid handsomely to be an assistant coach. And then after that, the Cavs went with John Beilein. That was a disaster. We don't have to rehash that. But the runner-up in that search was JB Bickerstaff. And the Cavs made sure that they brought JB on that staff so it could be a reliable, stable NBA lifer to kind of help John Beilein learn how to deal with day-to-day stuff in the NBA, to be his right-hand man, to teach him certain things that he didn't know, that he couldn't have known because he wasn't in the NBA. He didn't have that experience. So I was getting the impression as this coaching search for the Cavs was going on and on and on, that some of these guys that they are interviewing, Ethan, like, yes, it's for the head coaching job, but in the back of the mind of Kobe Altman and general manager Mike Gansey and owner Dan Gilbert and the other decision makers within the organization, in the back of their mind was this idea of, okay, if we get whoever it is as head coach, whoever it is we like the most as head coach, let's keep whatever guy in mind to be the lead assistant. The Lakers, it seems like they're doing the same thing. And I think part of the reason why they had such an extensive search is because they understand that if they're going to go the route of JJ Redick, he's never been a coach at any level before. He's a first-time coach in the NBA in Los Angeles. Just add that pressure and that expectation onto it. On a team that is going to have championship aspirations because of LeBron James and Anthony Davis together and because of a title window that is not closed completely, but that window is starting to close more and more and more each year. So you got to capitalize on the last couple of years of LeBron in the NBA. So because like that seems to be the direction that they're going, you know, the Lakers are going to try and find an experienced, smart, respected lead assistant coach for JJ. And there is conversation around the league that if JJ does indeed get this Lakers job, like it appears he's going to, that he's going to try and take James Borrego with him, or one of those other guys that the Lakers have interviewed during this process. And that could affect the Cavs. And it's not to say that, you know, if you're James Borrego and you have an opportunity to be the head coach of the Cavs, if that's the direction that Cleveland ultimately goes, you're not going to turn that down to be an assistant to JJ. But, you know, if James Borrego isn't the direction that the Cavs go, then he has the choice of, do I become the lead assistant for JJ Redick in Los Angeles, or do I become the lead assistant potentially for whoever it is in Cleveland, or do I go back to New Orleans, or whatever the case may be? And the same thing goes with some of these other candidates that the Cavs are looking at. So I do think that there is some level of interest when it comes to the Cavs coaching search in what the Lakers ultimately end up doing. Because I do think that the Cavs have it in their mind to open up the checkbook once again to bring in a highly paid assistant coach, whoever it is that finishes runner up in this coaching search. But that guy, you know, if the Lakers opening is there, the assistant to JJ is there, then it becomes a more complicated discussion.
And speaking of the Cavs coaching search, there was another person, an assistant coach that got the Cavs got permission to interview today. That was the Denver Nuggets assistant David Adelman as one of the next names, and he is someone who stepped in for Chris Finch during the playoffs when Chris Finch went down with an injury of his own, and it was just showing that you have to step up into a brand new role randomly, basically tossed into the fire, and it's like trial by fire is really sometimes the only way to learn, especially in a playoff scenario. It's sometimes the best way that people can learn on the fly. And like you're saying, there for the players and the coaches that could be going different places, but especially for this coaching search, you think about having somebody by your side that's gone through the mud, gone through the fire, gone through those things, and you think about Chris Quinn, and you think about other guys who have sat on the sidelines for championship runs, and how those guys could impact guys like JJ Redick, who haven't gotten the opportunity to coach at any level. Or you think about how the Cavs could double up on one of these coaches and have them still be in an assistant role, be like, hey, we're going to throw you a couple extra dollars because if he can't get the job done, you up next. So it's really the thought process of, one, that head coaching job for this next decision is big. One, for Kobe Altman. We've talked about that at an abundance. Two, it's also big for whoever is in the assistant role, depending on what the Cavs end up doing, because you never know how quickly you might have to jump into that role. But
and that's what it is, Ethan. It's not just the head coach when it comes to this Cavs coaching search, right? It's potentially a whole new staff, and the staff matters greatly. JB Bickerstaff, obviously, a couple of years ago, he brought in Greg Buckner because that was somebody that he trusted. He wanted him to be his right-hand man. He was able to bring in JJ Outlaw. He obviously identified Luke Walton and brought him in. Sidney Lowe, same kind of thing. If you look at the NBA Finals right now, the Boston coaching staff is stacked. Joe Mazzulla is a young head coach, but he's got Sam Cassell with him. Right? He's got Charles Lee with him, who is now going to be the head coach of the Charlotte Hornets, a well-respected assistant for a number of years in the NBA, a guy who had opportunities and got interviews to be a head coach in the past. Like, that is a really, really good coaching staff, and it's not just the head coach. It's not just Joe Mazzulla. It's the other guys. Some of them are responsible for offense, right? Some of them are responsible for substitution patterns. Some of them are responsible for defense. And then you look at Dallas. Jeez, are you kidding me? Jason Kidd is the head coach, but they've got Sean Sweeney, a guy who, has gotten interviews recently, a guy who is looked at as one of those up-and-coming assistant coaches. They also have Alex Jensen. They brought him from Utah. He's been a head coach at the national team level. He was a head coach of the Cleveland Charge, their first ever year in the G League. He was Quinn Snyder's essential right-hand man in Utah for a number of years. He's a guy who is partially responsible for the development of Daniel Gafford and the development of Derek Lively. And he did the same thing for Rudy Gobert in Utah. So like that kind of staff with, talented guys, up-and-coming guys, respected guys, that matters. That matters greatly. So if the Cavs potentially go offensive minded with their head coach, then maybe they want a defensive minded lead assistant for whoever it may be, so that one guy can run the offense, one guy can run the defense, however they want to set it up. It's not just about the head coaching hire, it's about the entire staff that they can build out. And when the Cavs have these conversations and these interviews with all of these different candidates, one of the questions is always, okay, like if you got this job, who are you looking at potentially to bring on board for your staff? Are there some guys here in Cleveland that you want to keep on the staff? All of those kinds of things are being discussed during this process. And I get the sense that Dan Gilbert is one of the owners that is always going to value a quality staff and a quality lead assistant, and he's going to be willing to pay in a way that not every organization is going to.
And two of the things that you mentioned that stood out to me, Chris, is you said that there might be an opportunity for an offensive and a defensive minded coach. And I think that's really 100% true. And I also think that both coaches need to have that player development mindset, because for this Cavs team, we both know that if there is Garland sticks around, he's a guy that needs to be developed and might need multiple different voices, because he can develop on the offensive end and he can develop on the defensive end. Then you think about Evan Mobley. Right. Maybe he shifts towards more of the offensive-minded coach and player development to think and get his thoughts on everything that's going on, because we already know how good he is as a defensive player. And then you think about Max Strus and all of these guys that have different areas that can go. And I really like the idea of having two coaches, like an assistant that's an offensive-minded or defensive-minded, or a head coach that's offensive and defensive, and the other being the assistant. Like, having two guys that you can look at and be like, okay, well, if you're going to go this way, then I'm going to get you to pay more attention to what he's saying rather than trying to lean more on this. And I think that's really important. Right. The other thing that's a little token that I wanted to throw in there, because you did mention the Cleveland Charge, and I do know that we cover them too, and I want to make sure we give them some love. But the Cleveland Charge are moving again, Chris. This is the third time in 4 years, and the team has changed its home venue. They're moving to the public auditorium, the Cleveland Public Auditorium, and this is because of the demolition of their old home, and they signed a new contract that's scheduled for 6 years, starting with the 2024-2025 season. So this is happening real quickly, and it's something that you might have to monitor to see how the Cavs and the Charge adjust. But you also, I was reading a lot of different comments, as I always do, trying to get up and think about what the fans are thinking for the move. And a lot of people were excited because it's a historic arena. It's a historic venue, right, that people get to, you get to think about all the people that have performed there. You get to think of the different space. I know the Charge, I think they brought in around 4,000 fans every game, and now you got a place that's like 10,000 people deep. It's like you have the option to expand if that happens, whatever. But, it's just a different opportunity. I know I wanted to give the Cleveland Charge some love in that light. But, Chris, we are going to move on to the next exit interview of Dean Wade, one of the most impactful players on this Cavs team. We know him as the defensive stopper, and we know him from what Cavs fans have been saying this postseason when he was trying to return, is he's the Boston Killer. And that's one of the moments that we can reminisce on during this podcast. But I wanted to just go through a couple of his stats to give some light, and especially talking about his contract situation as well, because we know he had a contract extension in 2022 that has him set up through the 2025-26 season. And, that's 2 years left, Chris, and we got to figure out a lot of more contracts to go through this offseason, who might be getting more extensions and things of that nature. But Dean Wade, let's talk about his stats real quick. So Dean Wade played in 54 games. He started the most of his entire career. He started 32 games, and he shot 39.1% from three on the most three-point attempts per game average this year. He also had one of the better minutes per game for the Cavs. And he also had the highest defensive rating, and I think he had one of the better net ratings as well. But just looking around the league, you think about players that make impacts for their team, right? And defensively, Dean Wade had a net defensive rating of 103.5. I think that's the Cavs defensive rating with him on the court. And there are two players that are above him that played 50 or more games this season, and that's Jonathan Isaac for the Orlando Magic and Jordan McLaughlin for the Minnesota Timberwolves. So that's pretty nice company, and to know that you're number 3 on that list speaks to his capabilities, especially on the defensive end, and what he is able to bring to this Cavs team. And I know earlier in the season, I wasn't giving him a whole lot of love, but I feel like I made up for it as the season went on, because I saw the error of my ways. I saw him in person more so, and man, I gotta give him his props and give him his flowers, because Dean Wade was hooping, and the Cavs felt his absence when he was out for the playoffs, and for majority of the playoffs, and when he was out with that knee injury after he came back in Houston. So I wanted you to give your thoughts on Dean Wade's season and what you see from Dean Wade. And we'll get into specific questions later.
Well, I tried telling you, young blood. I've been trying to tell everybody in this city, in this area that loves the Cavs, just how important Dean is. And at times it didn't look so good for me because of him not being available. You know, the time that the Cavs were most excited to see Dean Wade was in the first round series against Orlando and the second round series against Boston, because, you know, during the playoffs last year against the Knicks, he just wasn't right. He wasn't right mentally. He wasn't right physically. And I think the Cavs wanted to see, okay, you know, when Dean is confident, when Dean is healthy, when Dean is in the right mental space, how much of an asset can he be to us in a 7-game series? Can we put him on Jason Tatum? Can we put him on Jaylen Brown? Can we put him on Paolo Banchero? Like, all those different guys. That's what they were thinking. Can we play like a more 4-shooter lineup using him next to Evan Mobley or using him next to Jared Allen? The Cavs had big plans for Dean going into the playoffs, and I kept writing that over and over and over again. But he just wasn't right physically, and he tried to gut through it, and he told me after Game 5 in Boston that he didn't know exactly what his plan was for the offseason, because he was still trying to figure everything out, and he was still trying to process the season coming to an end. But he said he was going to take weeks off to continue to get his knee right. And surgery was obviously something that was discussed as well. So that tells you the significance of the injury that he was trying to play through, and how much he wanted to be out there for his team, that he was willing to fight through that and push himself in the rehab process more than he's ever pushed himself in his career. But he is an effective player. He is a 3-and-D type guy that can guard 2 through 5 in most cases. He is somebody who can play the 3, the 4, or the 5 for the Cavs, depending on the lineup that they're in. He is one of the top 9 guys in this potential rotation moving forward. And he should be, because of what he brings on the defensive end of the floor, because of the spacing that he provides offensively, and because of his ability to knock down shots. Just because his name is Dean Wade and he doesn't have, you know, the big contract or a bunch of notoriety, and he was somebody who came from the G League and turned himself first into an NBA guy, and then turned himself into a rotational player, and then into a part-time starter. Like, if you just take the name out of the equation, Dean Wade, and you look at his impact metrics, you can see a guy who has a place for a team that wants to compete for a playoff spot and wants to compete for a championship. Not everybody is going to take the same number of shots as Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. Like, that's not his role. His role is to make an impact at both ends of the floor, fill in the gaps, don't have too many touches. He's not going to have plays run for him. And, like, not everybody can be effective in that kind of role where they're just like so out of the equation offensively. And they're just there to space the floor and make things easier on their teammates. But Dean understands that that is his role, and he has learned how to play to that role. And then defensively, you brought it up. There's another stat that I use. It's a website called Dunks and Threes. It's estimated plus minus. It's basically the estimated impact on defense for a guy per 100 possessions. And the top guy in the NBA, just to put it in perspective, the top guy in the NBA this year in estimated defensive plus minus was Jonathan Isaac. And he was a great defender, and I think everybody would admit that. Second on this list was Isaiah Hartenstein, who was very, very good. Alex Caruso, OG Anunoby, Victor Wembanyama, Draymond Green, Jalen Suggs, Bam Adebayo. So, like, that's the kind of company that Dean Wade was in. Like, he had impact metrics on the defensive end of the floor, according to this particular stat, that were close to Bam Adebayo and Jalen Suggs and Draymond Green and Victor Wembanyama, who I voted for Defensive Player of the Year. So, like, that's the kind of impact that he can make on a nightly basis on that end of the floor specifically. And that cannot get overlooked, and that cannot get lost when the Cavs decide on whoever this next head coach is. They have to find a place for Dean. The other thing that is valuable about him, Ethan, is you're talking about a rotational player for a playoff contending team that makes $6 million a year. That is a crazy good bargain if he can continue to improve or just play at the level that he showed this past year from an impact standpoint.
Chris, what you just said about the stats and who was kind of in that list reminded me of something when Patrick Beverley's goofy self said that, you look at the stats, and if you look at the stats, when I'm guarding you, it feels like Giannis is guarding you. I'm like, come on. Like, maybe the stats were I don't even know. Maybe the stats were weighing in his favor in that case, but Dean, I'm gonna say it this way: when Dean Wade is guarding you, it feels like Victor Wembanyama's guarding you, and that's a little bit of a step up.
Don't go that far now.
Hey, based on the stats now.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, just to clarify, Dean Wade had the highest net rating for the Cavs this season, 8.3.
Yeah.
Second's Donovan Mitchell, obviously, 7.3. And then you look at his stats for the regular season totals, like he took 202 3-pointers. He hit 79 of them. Like, he's almost at 40% from 3-point range. And you think about how he played this season. At the beginning, he wasn't taking shots because he wasn't confident. He was passing the ball up. He wasn't getting his open looks like he was. But as his teammates, as he began to gain confidence throughout the year, and people started yelling at him to take shots because he was wide open, that you got to see his confidence grow and got to see that he was becoming someone that was more reliable. And I think that's what the Cavs missed and what Cavs fans wanted to see if that was going to be true in the playoffs. They didn't get to see it for long, but when you got to see him in that postseason and you saw him hit his first 3-pointer at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse and the entire arena erupted, it was probably one of the loudest sounds I've heard in that arena all year long. And I mean, that's what you're talking about when you're getting a guy that's, one, not all that old, two, and is also continuing to learn where he fits in with this team.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that goes into my next question for you, Chris, because you said rotational player, and I agree with you. I think he should stay in the rotation and not be in the starting lineup. But just a couple years ago, there was a conversation about him fighting for that small forward spot. Do you think there is an argument for him to be in the starting lineup this coming season, depending on what happens for the Cavs?
No, I think he's more comfortable, and I think it's better for the Cavs. And look, this is a positionless era in the NBA, but it's still, to some degree, you have to look at who do you guard, like what role do you fill within the team, what kinds of things are asked of you at a specific position. And I think Dean is more of a 4 than a 3, and I said it. He can play the 3, the 4, the 5 in certain matchups. He can guard 2 through 5, but I think his home is a power forward. I'll say this, right? Like if the Cavs decide this offseason, Ethan, that they are going to move on from Jared Allen, and they're going to break up the Jared Allen Evan Mobley combination, and the Cavs get the kind of trade offer from some team, whether it's New Orleans or Golden State or any one of the teams that would be a logical fit for Jarrett in a potential trade package. If the Cavs get the kind of offer that would make them consider it or even pull the trigger on it, then I think there's an argument to be made that if you're going to shift Evan Mobley to the full-time 5, you've got to find a floor spacing power forward that can complement his skill set, not get in his way. And I would think that Dean would be in that conversation. I think he should be in that conversation. Now, if the Cavs were to trade Jarrett, maybe they also go down the road of free agency and they try and find somebody that is more starter quality power forward to do that, to round out the starting 5. And we're just talking hypothetically here. But if they don't go that direction, then I think Dean is in the conversation for the backup power forward spot again. And it's, do we need George Niang? Do we need Dean Wade? That becomes the conversation, I think, for the Cavs. And to further the point on Dean, look, he wasn't great in the playoffs. He was on one leg, and you could tell that he just didn't have the same mobility. He didn't have the same explosiveness. He didn't have the same lift and stuff. So he was gutting through it, and he wasn't all that effective for the Cavs. But in the regular season, with Dean on the floor, in over 1,100 minutes, the Cavs had a net rating of 8.3. That was with him on the floor. In about 3,000 minutes with him off the floor, they were a negative team. There's a reason why people inside this organization, especially members of the front office who played a part in giving Dean the contract that they gave him, were so excited when I dropped a report for cleveland.com with an update on Dean, and that he was getting closer and closer, and that people inside the organization and people close to Dean were targeting a specific game to return against the Celtics. And when I put that report out, I had 2 people inside the Cavs front office texting me, and they said, quote, "Don't get my hopes up now," because they were looking forward to him playing in the playoffs. There's a reason why there is such a belief in Dean. It's because a lot of the numbers that they value greatly when it comes to a player's impact, his on-off court, all that stuff, like those are very, very favorable, and they have been for the last couple of years. So again, I think he's going to be in the rotation. I think he should be in the rotation. And unless the Cavs really reconfigure the roster or load up on different players to play that spot, there's certainly a place for him.
Yeah, Kristen, I mean, you mentioned it. The Cavs and the Cavs fans are 2 different beasts when it comes to how they're thinking. At the beginning of the season, we talked about how if the front office or people upstairs had their choice of people who would be playing more, especially with injuries and stuff like that going on, Dean Wade was on the list of people that they wanted to see get more minutes. On the other hand, Cavs fans at the beginning of the season were like, why is this guy getting minutes? He's not scoring more than 10 points a game. He's not doing this, that, and the other. And then it got to the point where I posted a video of Dean Wade just running back and forth on the Boston TD Garden court ahead of one of the games in Boston during the playoffs. And everybody was like, is he coming back tonight? Is he coming back tonight, or is he coming back? When is he coming back? When is he coming back? And I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
we don't know. There's no clarity. But if you listen to Chris Fedor on the Wine and Gold Talk podcast or subscribe to Subtext, you might get some insight on when he might come back. But that's completely here or there. Just a little shameless plug. No worries. But Chris,
Appreciate that.
for sure. And Chris, I got a couple of more things that I wanted to touch on for Dean, but they kind of all go together, and we know the answers to most of them. What's the
Okay.
What's the most memorable moment from Dean Wade this season? Boston,
Oh,
20
geez.
point. Say it again.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
one's easy. You kidding me? It's a no-brainer.
20 points, fourth quarter, became the Boston killer, and why fans thought that he might have such a big impact in the playoffs against the Boston Celtics, especially with him having the potential of guarding Jason Tatum. So yeah, you
Yeah.
get a nick.
Became Travis Kelce's favorite NBA player that night.
Became his favorite football player's best friend in the
Yes,
span
that's
of a
right.
night. That's so tough. That was so nice to see. The other was, what does he do well? I mean, defense comes to mind. We talked about
Mm-hmm.
that. And what does he need to improve on? And when I'm talking about improvement for Dean, I want him to have the confidence that he had in the middle of the season at the beginning of the season. Like, I need him to be taking shots from deep when he's open. I need him to be running the floor and creating space for the other offensive teammates that he has, setting hard screens. And it's like the little things, because for him, I feel like when he gets the opportunities, he's successful. That 39% from
Mm-hmm.
3-point range shows that. If he gets that up to 40%, we're cooking. But it
Yeah.
feels like he needs to have the confidence to do that. And that can only be from him. Because we saw that even in the locker room when he's like, yeah, they lit a fire under me because I wasn't taking the shots. And he was like, well, I really have to continue to work on that for myself. And
Yeah.
that's where it gets into what we talked about earlier with Kyrie Irving. It's the person, it's the personal aspect of it, rather the human aspect, rather than the player.
Mm-hmm.
Confidence comes from reps, which we know Dean Wade puts in. He works with Sam Merrill at the practice facility on countless occasions, getting shots up and stuff like that. But it's also just knowing that you're in the NBA. Like, you've made it here. You've done what it took to get here. Now you just have to have confidence in yourself.
Yeah, look, I think Dean is who he is, right? I think he's the ultimate role player. He's not going to ever be a full-time starter on a championship contending team, or at least a team that has those kinds of aspirations. Not everybody gets better. Not everybody gets to that point. You need role players who understand their role, who are able to play to their role. Look at somebody like the Dallas Mavericks. Not everybody has the responsibility of Luka. Not everybody has the responsibility of Kyrie. It works because you have a bunch of different guys who understand their role, and they can go out and they can perform to that role. And some nights, that might require you going in the game and shooting a bunch of threes if you're Tim Hardaway Jr. Other nights, that means you got to be a cheerleader on the bench, or you're going to have to wait for an injury, or you're going to have to wait for somebody to get in foul trouble. Tim Hardaway Jr. was in the running at one point for Sixth Man of the Year. They get to the playoffs, and he's been displaced by Jaden Hardy and Josh Green. But, it takes that, right? So not everybody is going to have a huge role offensively. Not everybody is going to get consistent 25 to 35 minutes a night. And Dean's not going to be that guy. He's not ever going to be that guy. He is who he is. He is the ultimate role player. He's like the 8th, 9th, 10th guy in a championship caliber rotation. And that's okay, because the things that he does well impact winning. And that's something that the Cavs definitely need. They're a better rebounding team with him on the floor. They're a better defensive team with him on the floor. They're a better offensive team. He allows them to play 4-shooter lineups next to either Jarrett or Evan Mobley. And there's value in all of that stuff when it comes to him. So, I like him. Other teams out there like him as well. Phoenix reached out about the possibility Brooklyn has reached out about the possibility in the past. If the Cavs don't do things drastic when it comes to their roster reconstruction this offseason, I'm interested to see Dean. And for me, the next step for him, and this is really, really important, is he's got to stay healthy. He's got to find a way to be more reliable from that standpoint. Like the things that he brings when he is healthy, that makes him reliable because you have an understanding of what you're going to get. A low maintenance, low touch role player who does a lot of different things well. But he's got to be out there, Ethan. Struggled with injuries this past year, struggled with injuries last year, struggled with injuries in college and high school too. So at some point, he's got to find what it is that's going to allow him to stay on the court more consistently and when it matters the most. That's the other thing.
Yeah, because he hasn't really had that experience in the postseason as much as he would like because he's coming back from injuries and all of those things. But I think you
part
mentioned
of this, Ethan, as a relatively young, inexperienced player, part of this is learning how to get yourself through an 82 game grind and the things that you have to do off the floor in order to do that, or the things that you have to do to preserve your body and allow your body to recover and all that different stuff. Playing 82 games in the regular season is exhausting. So you have to learn how to manage an 82 game regular season. And it feels like Dean is still learning that. You know, last offseason, he introduced yoga. Last offseason, he cut out like fried foods, basically. No more Chick-fil-A for him. He changed his diet up a little bit. So I'm interested to see if there's something else that he's going to do this offseason, since, you know, that stuff did work to some degree, but it didn't allow him to be healthy at the most important point of the season. So I'm curious to see, when I have an opportunity to talk to him at some point this offseason, what kinds of things he's trying to implement this time around.
Yeah, and I mean, we got a candid response from Dean about his injuries. He said there's a couple tears in there somewhere. So
yeah.
I'm
a couple tears. Okay.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see what he did this offseason and if there's going to be an official release on what he might have done for this team, or we just got to wait to see. But Chris, what you mentioned, and I'm going to end with this, what you mentioned about Dean and how we know his role. We know that he's going to have different opportunities based on the night, based on the matchup, based on the team that he's playing. But Dean is one of those guys that isn't crying or asking for playing time. He's just ready to go, and he's doing it with a smile on his face. I don't think I've seen Dean Wade in a bad mood. And like, even when he's walking around when he was injured in the locker room or back room, or walking back to his car and talking to fans along the way, he always had a smile on his face. He was enjoying the moment. He was being in the NBA, and you need those guys around you. But with all that being said,
that's what I mean by low maintenance.
100%.
Yeah.
But with all that being said, Chris, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. That's where you can get the news on Dean Wade, if that comes out in an official release, or if we find out something behind the scenes and we let you know beforehand. So, to get that info, sign up for a 14-day free trial, or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.